Hello, everybody, and welcome back. This is Jeff Jones. With me today again is Jack. Hello, Jack. How you doing?
Hello, everyone.
Welcome back to Documentary Club. Today we are going to talk about the documentary from Frontline called The Confessions. This is a documentary that was picked by Jack. It's about an hour and a half long, so if you guys want to go ahead, I hope you've seen it before. If not, you can follow along with us and let us know what you think in the comments or in the live after the show. But first off, Jack, you were the one that brought this to my attention, so I was wondering if you wanted to give me a little bit of a heads up or a teaser trailer, or give us a little insight as to, what made you decide that you wanted to talk about this one.
I think it was 2020 or 2021 when a group of us from Foul Play watched it. It was just mind-blowing. I really wish that they had done a part two and followed up. They didn't, but even with what we've got, it just blew me away. Almost knowing and understanding what happened to these guys, and it's not just these four. There were others that, as we go along in here, you're going to find out there are even more that actually were sucked into this whole thing. They had to they had to release those guys, but it was nuts what happened in this particular case. Just crazy.
Throughout the documentary, it's kind of obvious that there was false confessions. Like, we don't find that out later. It's we kind of know that from
in your face.
Yeah, in the beginning. So we're not spoiling anything by saying that these were false confessions.
No. Not at all. But understanding and finding out more about this particular detective that worked for the Norfolk City Police and his actions, how this guy operates.
Ford, right?
Ford, yep.
Yeah, Detective Ford.
How he operates is just, you have to understand again, thinking about the how a particular department operates, and we know that within the United States, even the world, certain captains or whoever's running that particular agency, some departments, the top dog will not tolerate any kind of bullshit. So understanding how this guy operated and what he did kind of sets the tone for what's really going on within that department. But because it couldn't have just been this guy operating in a vacuum. There's no way, not a chance, that his superiors did not know something funny was going on and allowed it. So that's bothersome.
Let's start our review, and we'll just kind of break down the story as best we can. So in this documentary, The Confessions, it's hard to follow along. So maybe it's important for us to kind of name the main players off.
Yeah, break it down. Break it down.
So we kind of get it. The four people that were involved in this story are Daniel Williams, Joe Dick Jr., Derek Tice, and Eric Wilson. We'll try our best to try to keep the names as straight as we can, and I'll try to insert pictures as best we can just to keep who's who.
I need to add one thing.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just keep in mind, everyone, and not to confuse the issue, these are the four main guys that gets really pulled into hell in this, but there are others that are going to become involved as well. So just keep that in mind, and we'll tell you when that happens.
That's right.
So that doesn't get confusing with the four main players.
Yeah, and these were dubbed the Norfolk Four.
Yes.
Right. And so this surrounds the 1997 rape and murder of Michelle Moore-Bosko, often just called Michelle Bosko. Daniel Williams and Joe Dick, who were interrogated and falsely confessed to the rape of Michelle Bosko. Daniel Williams initially confessed after an 11-hour interrogation. He was denied food and water and sleep. They say his confession was inconsistent with the facts of the crime, and later he was exonerated through DNA. Joe Dick is the roommate of Daniel Williams. Joe Dick ends up implicating Daniel Williams So Joe is the first guy to go down, and the authorities, they used, the normal pressuring tactics that we've heard in a lot of these cases. So denying food and sleep, just we're not going to let you out of here until you tell us what we want to hear. Both of these cases of, Joe Dick and Daniel Williams were high pressure tactics, high pressure confession tactics. And I don't know if they used, popularized now is known as the Reed technique, but if not, it was very similar. They
yeah.
Let's get right to the first part of the documentary. Dan was the first suspect. He confessed to being the one who raped Michelle. So Dan's confession led the jury to convict them all. Michelle Bosko's body is found after her husband, who's also in the Navy, returned from sea, and he found his wife Michelle dead in their apartment. And Williams was he's a 25-year-old machinist mate in the Navy. He'd only been married for like 11 days. I think that's one of the points that kind of brings home true, is that he's just freshly married and then he's out raping and killing. It's
no criminal record, nothing. Okay, well, and it's interesting to point out that after this happened, this detective asked Daniel to come down to the police department to give his statement. He said, well, okay, he didn't think anything about it. And he never leaves. And after he's, first questioned and why he called 911 instead of the husband, accusations of rape and murder were brought on him pretty quickly. They asked him to take a polygraph, and he said, sure. It's interesting that all four of these guys took polygraphs, and they were all told that they didn't pass, but they've never released these to the public.
And I think we saw this in the previous, one of our previous ones that we covered, and that was in American Nightmare, that they never released the polygraph. And I find that so troubling.
It is troubling. Very troubling. But then, this Detective Ford, he's getting in this Williams' face. He's yelling, name calling, promises of help, and the standard Reed kind of tactics to pressure. Just understand, if anyone out there, teach your children. Police are looking when they're they gotta think somebody's a suspect. Their job is not finding the truth. They're looking for a statement. That's what they want. They want someone to say, oh, yeah, I did it. They got you. You're screwed. You're absolutely screwed once you do that. So anyway, they put all this, he puts all this pressure for hours and hours on this guy.
Daniel Williams, at one point, I put in my notes, he said, I was so emotionally drained, I was willing to tell them whatever they wanted to hear.
Oh, yeah. And
we've heard that from a lot of wrongful convictions and false confessions. They're just like, I need this to be over with. This has got to stop.
It's important to understand that, not understanding how the legal system works and saying the words lawyer now to end it in the interrogation, lawyer now.
Yeah, so the next part, they talk more about the confession with Daniel Williams, and Williams had initially claimed to have been, to have beaten Michelle with a shoe. Yeah. He denied using a weapon and choking her, but the autopsy report showed that she had been stabbed and strangled. So already we're finding an inconsistency with what his story is. Daniel was charged with the rape and murder less than 24 hours after the body was discovered. Sometimes I talk about how, like, the detectives, they just want to go home and have dinner, and this seems like, oh, we got our guy, nothing to see here. We're gonna wrap this one up. Even though Daniel was charged with murder, he said that he was innocent and he wanted to talk to an attorney. Daniel believed he shouldn't call for an attorney because it would make him look guilty, but then later he realizes that his innocence couldn't defend him against the interrogation tasks of the police. And I remember tactics of the police, and I remember this part in the documentary where he's like, I'm innocent, that should be enough. And that really reverberated with me. And I think that, going back to what you just said, Jack, about how I want a lawyer, I want to lawyer up. Just because you're innocent doesn't mean you don't need a lawyer. So the investigation is closed, done, before the DNA comes back. They've closed the case before the DNA even comes back. So then the police are faced with a choice of either reopening the investigation or letting the real killer go free. And they're like, oh, DNA? We can work with that. We'll figure it out. We don't need to let this guy go.
The focus shifts to Joe Dick Jr., and he's a roommate, another sailor, and roommate of Danny Williams, the guy this is all kicked off. Because remember, this DNA has come back, and it doesn't match what they pull from the victim. So they know they got a problem. So they go back to him, and he names his roommate. And this guy, he's pretty introverted. If you watch the documentary, you'll see that. He caves, and he admits to his involvement. This is about 6 months after the investigation began, and they went after him just hard, hours and hours, and he finally broke, and he admitted to being present at the scene. But then he later claimed that this interrogation was really manipulative and really traumatic to him, and his confession really stood out to his family, to family and friends and all that, because wasn't this guy. He just wasn't a criminal in any way. That wasn't his nature. He also took a polygraph and again said he was lying about the failed polygraph.
You failed.
So he gets mentally this beat, and ultimately he confessed.
Joe Dick Jr., he is really kind of the pivot point for this case. A lot of the things revolve around this confession. Although the others confessed, his is the one that kind of ties it all together. And so everybody goes down because of his confession. Dick's parents receive a call telling them that their son has been arrested. And they were like, you got the wrong Joe Dick Jr. You got the wrong guy. Like their first is not our Joe Dick,
Yeah. Right.
But when they get there, when they get to the the cop shop, as I like to call it, Joe had confessed. And then they hired a lawyer. The lawyer's he's there, right? He's at the police department. He's at the police office. And they're like, well, we need a lawyer. And they're like, oh, we just happen to have this lawyer for you.
Right.
If you want him. He's just there. And it's like, how, maybe they're, I don't know what they were thinking, but I don't think it's ever a good idea to take the advice of law enforcement on what lawyer you should hire. And if it's
never.
I'm looking for a car today. Well, I've got the car for you. It just happened to be here, And I think it just so much was wrong. And the lawyer Michael Fasanaro, I don't think he was ever on the side of Joe. He never believed in Joe's innocence.
No, never.
From day one.
And how much money his parents gave? You want to tell that?
How much was it? Do you remember?
$22,000.
Okay, that's what I thought. 22,000. He just kind of had that number ready to go. I'll do it for 22.
Yep, and he did nothing.
And so, Fasanaro said that, he believes that only a guilty person would confess, that an innocent person would never confess. And if your lawyer's not on your side, then what? You know what I mean? Then where are you?
Exactly. Your lawyer's got to be on your side. He can't be a 50-50. He can't be playing to another master.
Although I've heard some lawyers say, I don't care, I'm just trying to get him off. Okay, but that's a little different than thinking that they're guilty. Like if your attitude is I'm a defense attorney, I don't care what happened. My job is to get him off. That's
Yeah,
far cry from pretty sure he's guilty. You know.
that's right.
Um,
Because that's going to change the way they go about their doing whatever.
Joe, is hoping that the DNA is gonna save him. He's like, well, like he goes kind of back to that earlier point where I'm innocent, and then when they run the DNA, it'll prove I wasn't there. And then they get the DNA back, and it's not his, but nothing happens. They don't move on it. They don't release him. They don't say anything else. They're just like, well, but you confessed, so someone else must have been,
Yeah, got to be somebody else. We need some names. Joe, his dad has found out, he's confessed, and they'd always believed, he didn't do it. This guy's Joe's attorney that they had hired advises him to cooperate with the cops, and he urges Joe to confess to get the death penalty off the table. This guy Vincent Falsanero, that the prosecution hinges on the confession, so he's gotta admit to it to take the death penalty off the table. And so his parents try to persuade him to confess, but he says no. He said everything I told the authorities he'd made up wasn't truthful.
I remember this part really specifically, Jack, because when Joe is like, it's one thing when it's coming from your lawyer, when your lawyer's saying, you got to confess this, or you got to cooperate to take the death penalty off, and he's like, I don't know if I should do this. It's not. But I remember him saying it's a different thing when it comes from your parents, when it comes from your mom, or parents, that you feel like maybe I should have. So the lawyer has like really manipulated the parents, Falsanero has, into, you got to convince Joe that this is the right thing to do, that we need to get the death penalty off the case. And, not to go too far down a little sidebar here, but one of the flaws of the death penalty is right here, that they use it as a tool to get people to fold. They're like, we're going to put you to death, so you need to, and that's one of the biggest flaws, I believe, in the death penalty, is that it is used as this tool to get people to go, man, I can't risk it. If the jury, I'm innocent, but my fate relies on 12 people, and if the prosecutor is really good, I might end up on death row. I can't risk it. So they use it as this, like, as this tool.
Sledgehammer.
Right.
This detective goes back to him, and so he names this new guy Wilson, right?
Right. Eric Wilson.
And he gets sucked into it. And it didn't matter if they didn't have any close relationship to Joe at all, this Wilson guy. But he named him, which is all a bunch of lies. He's scared he's going to be put to death,
Yeah, if you don't include these other guys that have been named, or their names have come up, and the detectives just go, oh, we got another name, let's add him in there.
Yeah. That's another thing, that should become a clue, is because they keep having the police and the prosecutor keep having to change the story as this goes along.
Isn't that true? And we'll get to that even more. There's this part that I got a note for that it's so comical coming up a little later, but I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. So Joe Dick is discussing his decision to cooperate with the authorities in this investigation, and he believes it's in his best interest. And like I said about using the death penalty as a tool, you kind of can't blame him at that point. They're like, they're going to convict me of this, and I'm going to be put to death, and I didn't do it.
Yeah, this blew me away.
Not present during the interrogations after he's got this attorney, and it's like, I've heard this in other cases before, and I don't understand how any lawyer would not be. Well, I don't need to be there. You don't need to be there. What? So anyway, Joe admits that his presence might hinder him more than help him, so he chooses to proceed alone. Months go by, and then then Joe starts giving more names, and one of those names is George Clark. But the police couldn't find George Clark, so they put out a description, and it kind of looks like this guy Derek Tice, another friend of the victim. So then they arrest Tice, and they interrogate him by Detective Glenn Ford, who is just persistent on getting this confession, and Tice is like, I'm not involved. They keep pushing him and using these aggressive tactics. They give him a polygraph test. Again, they never disclose the results. They say you failed. Then Tice refused to speak without a lawyer. Ford brought him back into the interrogation room, where he subjected him to another 13 minutes of interrogation. And so they don't really say where Tice's lawyer is at this time, but he's not present at that. So again, as soon as they get a new name brought up, they just go, oh, must be him, bring him in. I'm going to interrogate him until he folds.
Yep.
Derek, the other guy, challenges the authenticity of the confession to a series of rapes and murders, claiming it was the result of exhaustion and coercion by the police. He says that Ford manipulated him into confessing by feeding him details rehearsed for hours, and he created this narrative for him to just repeat and repeat.
Showed him crime scene photos too.
That's right. And so this is the part that I brought up earlier, and that was, Derek describes feeling mentally and emotionally drained, and he says, I was so emotionally drained, I was willing to tell them whatever they wanted to hear.
Derek said he'd try to show what the interrogation was like.
All right, Derek, let's start again. What happened that night?
I was at home, and a friend called me and told me to watch television. And
no. Quit. Right there. You're lying, Derek.
No.
No, you were there. You committed this crime, Derek. What you did was sickening. I've lived this case since its beginning. It's been my life.
No.
I know there was a party at Dan's house, and you went. Nicole got a headache, and she went to bed. Y'all started talking about girls, decided to go over to Michelle's apartment. Somebody knocked on the door. Somebody covered the peephole with their thumb. Y'all went in, and you raped and killed this girl. I know you did it.
I'm telling you the truth.
No, you're not telling me the truth, Derek. You're just a liar, and you're going to die. You deserve to die. I'm sorry. That's it. I can't. I can't do anymore. I'm sorry. I hope that was enough. I can't. 8.5 hours he was like that.
My fear was not of what would happen next. It was of Ford.
Wow. And he said his fear is not what was going to happen next. His fear was of Ford. He was fearful of the interrogator.
That's right.
During the confession, Derek describes his involvement in the crime. Dan and Eric and two unknown men named Jeffrey Ferris and Rick Pauley. These men were arrested based on Derek's testimony. Just because of what he said, they went and arrested him. But guess what? The DNA match was still not found. So they got two more guys, and they still don't have the DNA. So then later, Derek was offered a plea agreement on the condition that he identified the DNA match. Ford showed interest in a former Navy guy named John Danzer. Derek knew Danzer from back in Pennsylvania, and he visited Norfolk after the arrest. Derek argued with Ford about Danzer's potential involvement in the case, and Danzer is a whole nother saga that ends in an interesting little bit.
It is. Danzer had an airtight alibi for the day of the crime, but they prosecuted him anyway. Danzer was alleged to have been in an apartment where this crime happened to Michelle, but he was actually working in Pennsylvania on that day. But despite that, and I think there was a birthday party that they went to after work. Him and a bunch of work.
I believe. It was
work-
Danzer's
yep,
birthday. Yeah.
That's right. And they went and celebrated his birthday after work that day. But despite that alibi, they brought him back, Danzer back to the police headquarters, accused him of lying, charged him with murder and rape. And even with the confessions of other suspects and a negative DNA match, the Commonwealth of Virginia they would continue to go after Danzer. The prosecutor's name is DJ Hansen, and they had to continue to bend this theory of how it happened.
So I have
new stuff coming in and re-examining the direction of the case. Go ahead.
I have the two clips of Detective Ford and the prosecutor, so I'll pull those up right now.
Okay.
But in a deposition in 2006, he made the following statement.
That's the truth about what occurred. Every one of them was guilty. And I still believe that today.
Every one of them was guilty, and I still believe that today. Even after all of it, that's what he says.
He wouldn't let it go.
The police detectives in this case were very professional. It's not their business to obtain confessions at any cost. They're interested in the truth. When I look back on it, it seemed as though, as frustrating as it was to have this DNA come back, that it was not these guys, one after the other. It was almost as though Michelle was telling us that you don't have everybody yet. And if that was the one thing I take away from this case, that we were able to get as many people as we were. So she kept telling us that you don't have them all yet, and there's more.
What kind of pie in the sky prosecutor thinks like that?
I don't know.
Well, it must be a message from behind the grave that I need to get more suspects. That's your law training at work?
They had somehow had this vision that there was this gang, attack on Michelle somehow. And it's, not to really spoil anything, but how this all occurred at the end will really blow your mind if you haven't seen this documentary. It'll blow your mind.
Just when it seemed like the case was falling apart, a stunning revelation came to light, and this is bonkers. A letter that confessed to the crime by this man, Omar Abdul Ballard.
Remember that name,
Right.
Ballard.
Who's already in prison for a violent rape, which took place near the murder scene. Ballard's DNA matched the evidence. But here's the kicker, guys. The authorities, they said, nope, not good enough. Here you got Omar Abdul Ballard. His DNA matches. All they do is they add him in to the crime.
Yeah. And the theory of how that all took place, again, is maddening. Because they're trying to protect what they've already got instead of saying, okay, guys, we made a mistake. You're free to go. Here's some money. Goodbye. No, they can't do that. So, moving forward, Eric Wilson, he goes on trial for this rape and murder of Michelle. Despite his belief in the justice system, his ability to prove his innocence. But the prosecution, they present a new theory involving 8 individuals, including Wilson. Ballard, who they believe was also involved in the crime. Ballard, he initially claimed to have acted alone, but was now being linked to this group. The prosecution's theory was that Ballard had joined the other men in the parking lot and convinced them to join him in committing the crime. Yeah, they just, I think the claim was in the documentary was that they said they couldn't get the door open despite one of them being friends with Michelle and her husband. They were friends, but he couldn't get in. They couldn't get in. So they go out in the parking lot and they just happen to run into this guy Ballard and tell him about it. And he's like, oh, I'll get you in, man. No problem. And that's how this allegedly occurred. Can you imagine? They don't know this guy at all. None of them do. None. And, again, remember, none of these guys' DNA was found anywhere in this crime at all. So, but they had to create this theory. This is how this all occurred out in the parking lot. This defense attorney, his name, I think he may be Ballard's attorney, Greg McCormick. He's talking about the absurdity of this theory. These guys were these 7 white sailors and this one black sex offender that they had no association with at all. Yep.
So I got a clip here from Richard Leo, University of San Francisco, and I think he sums it up really well here.
If they were rational, objective, fair-minded police and prosecutors, they would have let everybody else go. But they couldn't admit what was so obvious. They made a mistake, a big mistake. 4 people had been interrogated coercively, confessed to a crime they didn't commit, and instead of acknowledging that mistake and these individuals' innocence, they tried to link Omar Ballard to these individuals. They tried to make it a group crime.
In the next section, they have the testimony of Joe regarding the rape case, and that part is pretty interesting. As I think they have him reread the testimony. They don't have the live recording, but he rereads some of it, and Joe recalls the incident where he's like, we overpowered this woman, we took turns raping her, and then he said he felt remorseful of his involvement. The nature of their testimony really raised some
really graphic.
Yeah, it was quite graphic, and the confession didn't really line up with the physical situation of the body, but instead It was just like he picked this out of the air, and he's like, well, then we did this to her.
Yeah, it was really graphic because they played some of his testimony, and it's not good.
It's overwhelming, yeah.
Well, if it was true, they would have found other physical evidence, and they didn't. That's just fact.
Well, you wonder how the suspects could have come up with these really depraved narratives of sexual assault, rape, and murder. And as I read through them, and particularly the one of, I think it was of Dick, it seemed to me that there was a clue in that they were kind of low-grade male pornographic fantasies, something out of a bad porno movie, particularly the one where 2 of them are having sex with her at the same time, one oral sex and one intercourse. And you said, wait a minute, this sounds like something he's making up out of his own deep phantasms, right? And it obviously bore no relation to the state of the corpse and the DNA evidence and so on.
In the case, it really gained national attention, and it brought in help from different law firms who believed these guys' innocence. But it took several years for the new governor to make a decision on the appeal, because they had appealed their convictions.
Yeah, there's a little bit more of the court stuff that I wanted to play, so we'll just give a little bit more here.
Eric's lawyer implied that Joe's testimony stemmed from his fear of the death penalty.
Mr. Dick, you would agree you are a liar, correct?
Yes.
You would agree that you have given totally false versions of this event on numerous occasions?
Yes.
You have lied in court, have you not?
Yes.
Because Joseph Dick does not want to die, correct?
Yes, sir.
Eric took the stand in his own defense. He claimed that his confession was false and was extracted by Detective Ford, who was, he said, very aggressive, very threatening, very angry. The prosecutor asked Eric if he would confess to killing someone if it weren't true.
At that point in time, if they had told me that I killed JFK, I would have told them that I handed Oswald the gun.
Both Eric and his lawyer were optimistic.
I honestly and truly felt that I was going to go home that day a free man. Because I didn't do it. I had All my hope and all my faith was put into that one moment, and it was shattered.
It shattered when his audio-taped confession was played in open court to a riveted jury.
Dan, Joe, and Michelle went and sat on this couch. They were just talking a little bit, and Dan grabbed her, put her on the ground, and everyone started wrestling. They asked me to join in. I said, fine.
When confessions are introduced at a trial, what happens is the presumption of innocence goes out the window. The confession, even when there's other evidence of innocence, the confession overrides that evidence. Jurors ignore that evidence.
The jury's verdict was guilty of rape. The confessions doomed them all.
Then Dan stabbed her. I stabbed her.
No one doubted that what they were hearing was the absolute truth.
Eric stabbed her. Joe stabbed her. And Rick Polly also stabbed her.
That was the part that really got me, Jack, is the story of everybody stabbed her. Like, this is the Murder on the Orient Express. Like, okay, now it's your turn. Okay, now hand the knife to him. Now hand it. How ridiculous.
It's insane. And that part got me too. But thinking about also all the other interrogations, why weren't they recorded too? Leading up to this.
Good point.
No recording.
It talks about the governor, he was the governor at the time, Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell, discusses like how controversial pardons are, and he granted the three individuals, Derek, Joe, and Eric.
But it was conditional. It was a conditional pardon.
McConnell initially denied the full pardon, citing doubts about their guilt because, again, of these overwhelming confessions. And he eventually granted them conditional pardons. And the problem with that is that the men still face the stigma and the consequences involved, as being sex offenders. And they make it difficult for them to find jobs. Eric's family, they live in a trailer. They don't have any friends. They face discrimination.
Thinking about, I'm free, but I'm really not free.
Right.
They're exonerated. And Derek and Daniel, they meet for the first time since they've gotten out.
This was a really good part, I thought. Didn't you? It's not enjoyable, but it was a more enjoyable part of the documentary to see them kind of meeting in freedom. Yes,
absolutely. It was good, and they were free. That better than being locked up, I guess. But Joe and Derek had met briefly, I guess, but Daniel hadn't seen Eric since testifying against him at trial, and he's pretty scared about it. He didn't know how he would feel, which you can't blame him. But he, this guy, he understood. He acknowledged they were all deceived and fell victim to just being scared, being put to death. And there's an updates on their legal status. They've met. I think they're meeting in Washington, if I'm remembering right. Talk about their legal status with their lawyers, sharing the hopes for clearing their names fully in the near future. And then they get, this news break that this deceitful detective, remember, Glenn Ford, he's been indicted for extortion. And they still remain hopeful that the indictment will shed more light on the bigger issues of systemic failure, the Norfolk police, prosecutors, defense attorneys, and even the judge and jury that led to their wrongful convictions. Of course, the guys are no longer incarcerated, but they're not yet really free. They're trying to rebuild their lives, but it's really difficult with that stigma hanging over your head.
Not to brush over that part that Robert Glenn Ford, former Detective Robert Glenn Ford, was indicted for extortion, and I'll give you guys a little update on his current situation here. This is from the FBI's article here. And it says former Norfolk homicide investigator sentenced to 12 years and 6 months in prison for extortion. So you're going to say, well, what kind of extortion? The extortion was that he was extorting suspects for money. I'll give you a lesser sentence. I won't go on you so hard if you give me money or whatever.
Or I'll just let you go if you pay me off.
There you go.
That gives you some insight about how he was treating witnesses or potential suspects or whatever. That's right. It's right down the alley of what he did to those guys.
I mean, is he trying to get people to say, "I'll give you whatever you want, just let me off"? You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like,
yep.
The trial showed that in instances dating back to the 1990s, Ford obtained monetary payments exceeding $80,000 from and on the behalf of individuals charged with criminal offenses in return for helping them secure release on bond and sentence reductions by falsely representing to prosecutors and judges that these individuals provided assistance in the investigation of homicides in Norfolk. And the evidence showed that Ford used informants to fraudulently obtain money from Crime Line, a program funded by private donations to reward persons to provide tips. So he had inside information. He's feeding it to other people so they could get money from Crime Line.
God, just imagine how corrupt this guy is.
You know, I've said this before on other shows. You know, our system is only as good as, you know, humans can be, right? We always have the weak link. Humans are, you know, driven by greed, fear, et cetera, and not everybody's 100% perfect all the time. So, you know, we need to have strict guidelines. We need to have strict policies. We need to continually be on the lookout. You know, every time you watch like a detective show, internal affairs is like the enemy of the people, right? But they're not. They're not actually the enemy. No. Internal affairs plays a really important role, and the FBI plays an important role in making sure that everything is above bar. But I mean, it's really tragic. But I think you feel a little bit better at the end knowing that this guy he went to prison. At least I felt a little better. I mean, not for the guy, but for justice, I guess.
Yeah, it did. Plus, what happened for these guys, these four, the Norfolk Four, which I'll let you tell that.
They ended up suing. So here we have the settlement was reached for the Norfolk Four, and it says that the city of Norfolk, Virginia, has agreed to pay $4.9 million to the four sailors who were wrongfully convicted of rape and murder based on intimidating police interrogations. A copy of the settlement agreement for the Norfolk Four was obtained. The state has also agreed to pay $3.5 million. So 3.5, 4.9, we're looking at, you know, after about $2 million apiece, I guess.
Probably.
Somewhere in that area. Does it make them whole? No. Does it make it better? At least if you're saying I can't work because I have this on my record, now at least it makes it a little easier for me to get by, right?
Yeah, and I'm not certain. I can't remember if somebody ever dug it up if they were completely exonerated. I think they were completely exonerated. That was taken. So they have no criminal record at all now. I think they were. Yeah, but nonetheless, the money will help, you know, if that didn't happen. But I think it did. You think about a state and a city, county, whatever, having to pay that much out, and the record. Because ultimately, they want their names cleared. So just paying money is only part of curing that. Full and total exoneration is the only real way, clearing their record because of what Ford did.
I find it hard to understand why sometimes. Is it because you can't be wrong? Well, I was, the only reason I'm wrong is because I missed something, not because I'm wrong, but because there's more suspects. And then,
right.
It must be the victim from on the other side of the grave sending me a message that there's more people involved, and
Yeah.
I'll just keep changing the story until it fits. It's beyond.
Well, when you factor in the lack of physical evidence that they weren't, and this story was just ballooning out into some kind of, I don't know, I don't even know what the proper word is, black fantasy island kind of thinking. I don't really know, man.
One of the parts that, and then I'll let you kind of have your summation as well. But one of the parts that got me is how strong those confession tapes are when played in front of a jury. Even after the jury has shown there's no physical evidence connecting them, there's none of this, there's none of this. These confessions that we're going to play don't fit the crime, but yet that was enough to sink the ship.
Yes.
Just shows how strong these confessions are, how strong these false confessions are, and we see it in other cases all the time. Like, and we saw it in this documentary. Even one of the attorneys had said, "Well, I couldn't imagine ever admitting to something I didn't do, especially as heinous as murder." Yet we see time and time and time again, Jack, that it happens. It really
does
happens.
happen. People get afraid. They get stuck in that box. They won't let them out. They won't give them water. They won't let them eat. They won't let them sleep. So it becomes a test of physical and mental endurance. If you're not a strong personality and say, I don't give a damn what you say to me, what you do to me. I'm never confessing to what you want me to confess to. It didn't happen. I wasn't there. Or saying, bring me a freaking lawyer right now. I'm not talking to you any further. Or let me go. Or let me go home.
Let that be the
lesson.
The theme of the last couple shows we've had here, that you think you're innocent and your innocence isn't enough, right? Your innocence isn't enough.
No.
You need a lawyer. And unfortunately, the justice system is expensive. We do have, public defenders who are overworked and underpaid, but, at least it's something. I want a lawyer. I'm not talking to you. The days of, innocent people have nothing to hide, I think that's over. I don't think you can think like that anymore. I think you have to think, if I have a fair and reasonable detective, yes. But not everybody is fair and reasonable, and you have to remember that for whatever reason, we don't know to this day why. I mean, even we saw Ford say, well, I still think they're innocent. I still think they're guilty.
That's
even
right.
after all of this.
Yep.
I wonder
what stuck on
this. From his prison cell. He's probably going, I'm innocent. I'm innocent. You got to believe me. I'm falsely locked up. Now do you believe? Now do you believe other people? Right.
Exactly.
He got his, as far as I'm concerned. Probably not quite. He probably should have got more. You know what I mean?
Probably. And I'll bet you that there's stuff that happened that they didn't find out about that they couldn't charge him with, or they just knew and couldn't prove it.
If it's stemming back to the 90s, and that's 20 years plus of this, that they've never found out about all of it. Yeah,
I agree. So,
what a crazy case!
Absolutely bonkers. Again, that's what I'm saying. This, they covered a lot. Don't get me wrong. There's a lot of information packed in this hour and 20 minutes or so of this documentary. But there's so much that I can just, reading between the lines, I can tell that we don't know about, that makes this case probably 100 times worse than what we see.
I hope everybody enjoyed it. At some points, it was a tough watch. It was laid out really well, but yeah, I think there's a lot of information that comes in that hour, 20 minutes at you. And so I hope everybody could kind of keep the main characters. I hope that the images and everything helped with that. I don't have anything else to add at this point. We can have a further discussion with the bigger group, hopefully, if people want to join in. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I think, I do, but I think it's better saved for maybe a larger group to just kick around and throw it around. I think that would be a good idea. If we're going to do a live and discuss the various aspects of the case.
Yeah, so I hope you guys out there drop a comment, join us in the live, either in chat or if you want to come on and join us on the show. We'd love to have, the Doc Club. It's all about you. It's about us, watching these documentaries together and then talking about, well, not watching them together, watching them on your own time and then talking about them together, kind of like how a book club works. So I'm going to sign off here at this point. So I'm going to say I'm Jeff.
I'm Jack.
And this has been Doc Club. We'll see you guys on the next one.